We're back, and what I'd like to talk to you a bit more about is obviously the birth chart and how it works. I spoke to you before, and I'll show you again because it's sitting on my lap, is my birth chart and all of the different houses. And you can see here how Gabrielle, who did this chart, obviously shows up the different dynamics. Now, as I said, I'm not skilled in reading a birth chart. I went and saw an expert, just as you would if you were feeling a little bit off and you went to, whether it be a naturopath or you went to a doctor, someone who actually studied in their field. Well, I certainly did with Gabrielle, and the reason why I did that was because I wanted to get to know myself better. Now, the one thing I will say is that someone sitting there and actually interpreting your chart is a lot more powerful than perhaps even just downloading and getting snippets and from an internet-based astrology site. Not to say that they won't be correct, but merely to say that some people can add great value when they're actually sitting in front of you and doing your chart. Now, the other thing to mention is in relation to the moon cycle emails. You'll be aware that there's a reason why I send out the moon cycle emails, and I do like to touch on various layers and how it all relates. So part of what I like to touch on is the fact that major planets sometimes go forward and sometimes they go backwards. Now, we all know that planets actually do not physically go backwards. What happens is that when the astrologers and when the astronomers used to witness the planets, is that sometimes to the human eye or through the telescope, as the planets were doing certain rotations, it would seem that they were actually moving backwards. So thus the term retrograde. And the two planets that I do like to talk a lot about in relation to that are Mercury and recently Mars. Mercury is a great planet. When it goes retrograde in relation to its impact on communications, it is fascinating. So certainly when I send out the moon cycle email and I say, warning, warning, we've got Mercury going retrograde, so double check plans, don't be too disconcerted if technology starts to break down. That is purely because that planet has that power with us, and it's often when, you know, phones drop out, or oh, I called the wrong person, or I sent this text but I sent it to the wrong person. Take it with a good sense of humour, if nothing else, and just be quite vigilant on what you're actually looking to do. The other thing in relation to money matters during that time, Mercury and mercantile, obviously in the English language, are quite interrelated. So in relation to money matters, it's a good time to assess, not necessarily a great time to sign contracts or to look to make a financial commitment. Always a good time though to, you can do some research, do some investigations, find out what it is you'd like to buy, and then when Mercury starts going forward again, that's the time to sign contracts, and that's definitely the time to make big purchases. So that's the planet of Mercury, which I always feel like sometimes it's the court jester who loves to have a bit of fun and make a few jokes at our expense, let's say. Now, the planet of Mars, this is the first time in the last 12 months that I actually was aware that Mars was going retrograde towards the end of last year into the beginning of this year. Now, normally Mercury is the planet that I'm hyper aware of, but I certainly became aware of Mars being retrograde because no matter how much I wanted to force things, I not only had an undercurrent of energy saying I just don't think it's the right time, but also too I had a lot of things stacking up that just weren't coming to fruition, and that became quite frustrating. And I think often in my moon cycle emails I was mentioning how frustrated I was at that. You know, I'd make a plan to have something happen and it would just take that extra bit longer. So a little bit frustrating even when you know that that's actually happening. So just to let you know that in the beginning part of this year, Mars was retrograde. Now, Mars is the action planet. It's the one that gets out there. It's also like the one that we often associate with war, getting in there and making things happen. So I will obviously let you know when Mars is going retrograde again. Once again, it just helps us not to live in a very stressful place. It helps us to enjoy the ride for what it is and to work with the energy rather than work against the energy, and certainly not blame ourselves for things not happening, and not blaming other people, most importantly. So a couple of planets which are key. Obviously then, the big two, the sun and the moon. The sun representing the masculine, the moon representing the feminine. Myself, the moon and the honouring of the moon is really important to me, knowing that we have gone through a big patriarchal age and now we're actually looking more towards the mother and the feminine and the matriarchal age, and we've seen a lot of emergence, which also has to do with a wonderful planet called Venus, but we can touch on that another time. So we're seeing a gradual shift in energy, and in a lot of ways we can actually visually see this as to the people in power, their general energy, seeing women achieving, and we recently saw at the Academy Awards, the first female director winning the Academy Awards. So a lot of interesting change happening in this Venus-based age. So what I like to touch on is the sun and the moon work together, just as the masculine and the feminine work together, and the moon reflects the sun, etc., etc. So in the moon cycle emails, it is always important to understand what sign of the zodiac the sun is in, and then understand the interplay with the energy that the full moon may be in at that time, or that the new moon may be in at that time. So these two energies, they work together and they work off each other in this wonderful dance that occurs. So understanding all of the layers of energy, and the real truth behind astrology for myself is that it reflects cycles and rhythms, and that impacts our life. My aim is to eventually have some people come in, and some astrologers that I can talk with, and you'll be blown away by their passion and their level of understanding, which far surpasses mine, I should say. So until next time, when I tape another two-part series in relation to the tarot, please continue to enjoy the journey, and if you have any questions, email me at www.psychicreadingroom.com.au.